I'm Peter Lee, and this is Newsbud's China Watch. This week, China, beware of Donny Big Hands, blood and embarrassment at Lago, and last days of the Dalai Lama. I don't think Xi Jinping enjoyed his trip to the United States too much. It lacked the superpowers consorting as equals with mutual respect vibe that is so important to PRC national esteem and Xi Jinping's political prestige. I was most struck that there was no Xi Jinping-Donald Trump joint press conference at the end. You know, with the podium, the flags, translators delivering the platitudes of the day, the eager journos jumping up and down like eager puppies. You know, what Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe got. Instead, to close the visit, Trump delivered up a serving of his usual word salad at the meeting table, and Xi, according to the official White House transcript, said, "Words in Chinese." When it was Xi's turn to make a statement, he looked rather flummoxed and put out, and mumbled something that was quite difficult to hear clearly. The translation of Xi's rather empty remarks was apparently piped into the headsets of the U.S. participants and were not even deemed worthy of broadcasting or recording in the White House transcript. And, of course, no decent video to impress the folks back home in China. Trump's pretty media savvy, and he also knows well the inner torment of a world leader yearning for public praise and approval. I suspect the visit was designed to deliver a message to Xi Jinping he's still on probation and doesn't get the full superpower superhero treatment until the PRC has done something the United States really, really likes. Maybe about North Korea. Trump did accept an invite to visit China this year, and in his dark moments, maybe Xi Jinping is thinking about a replay of this famous scene.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
I was trying to escape. It didn't work.
Of course, the big news, and another affirmation of Xi's second banana status, was Trump blasting Syria while Xi was obliviously sucking down his chocolate sorbet. In retrospect, the whole summit had the vibe for Xi of going over to a new neighbor's house for a playdate that doesn't work out, and the other kid just wanders off to spend time with his Xbox. Collateral damage of the strike was not limited to bruising Xi Jinping's sense of self-importance or, for that matter, the 7 Syrian civilians, including several children, reportedly killed by stray U.S. cruise missiles. Thousands of words of carefully constructed pre-meeting and post-meeting analysis by the world's experts descended into irrelevance. I too experienced this. What's left is speculation. I expect Trump communicated his expectations to Xi Jinping to do something more on North Korea, maybe without promising anything in return. The tone of the visit was, I think, China has to prove itself. But we don't know. Team Trump hasn't been leaking backgrounding much on this issue, perhaps because they want to milk the Syria strike PR benefits as long as they can before returning to the messy North Korean problem. Helping fill the news vacuum, the New York Times provided its interpretation of the Chinese response to the Syria strike by describing Xinhua as damning Trump's move as the act of a weakened politician who needed to flex his muscles and overcome accusations that he was pro-Russia. The Times article seemed to be keying off a Chinese language piece in Xinhua that doesn't quite say, weakened politician who needed to flex his muscles. It does say, administration making a show of power to relieve domestic pressure of Russiagate. Well, maybe we were reading 2 different articles. The overall tone of the piece I read could be characterized as Trump obtains domestic political running room and shifts U.S. Middle East and Russia policy with strike on Syria. Pretty insightful article, in my opinion. China is perfectly happy to exploit hostility to Trump in order to push the PRC as the successor to the United States as leader of the global order. However, I don't think Xi Jinping's takeaway from the Syria attack was, as some never-Trump analysts spun it, look at this pathetic, volatile, insecure, weak man, baby. It's more like, This guy just shot off 59 cruise missiles without warning, unilaterally, with no congressional approval or direct legal authorities, and people are loving it. That's something that attracts China's attention, and not just because of the sneak attack on North Korea angle. It's a wake-up call for China, too. A major distinction between the Obama and Trump administrations, I believe, is this. The Obama administration was led and staffed by a lot of sharp lawyers who made sure whatever they did was legal, even if it was shady. The Trump administration is led and staffed by a lot of shady people who hire sharp lawyers after they've done something shady and hope it turns out legal. The firm of Obama and Partners LLC was, I think, excessively invested in faith in the law and its own superior acumen, so it believed it could restrain and contain China with a web of laws. Under President Obama, the U.S. spent a lot of effort organizing multinational opposition to what it deemed China's defiance of the legal and moral norms of the principled international order. This is known as lawfare. The pinnacle of lawfare was reached by the Obama administration encouraging the Philippines to invoke arbitration under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea to challenge China's 9-dash line. The 9-dash line was and is a rather hollow Chinese claim that the South China Sea is not an international body of water subject to law of the sea, but instead a sovereign territory of China. The Philippines won the case and in the process exposed the limits of lawfare. First of all, China openly and furiously defied the ruling. Second, China's defiance highlighted the fact that the law of the sea has no enforcement mechanism. Third, there were enough loopholes in the law that China could continue its island building without effective censure. Fourth, the new Philippine administration of Rodrigo Duterte was less interested in perfecting its maritime legal rights than it was in using the judgment to extract financial benefits from China. The Obama administration was hamstrung in its response because the U.S. had staked its policy and credibility on protecting, perfecting, and upholding those nice lawyerly things like freedom of navigation and the law of the sea, things it would need to trash if it wanted to do coercive, unilateral, and maybe even violent and illegal things to punish China for flouting the arbitral award. So, we got a lot of freedom of navigation operations by the U.S. Navy near China's man-made islands, basically sailing through or inside China's maritime claims while glaring in an angry, meaningful manner. The freedom of navigation operations are 100% legal and also seem to highlight American impotence. This makes U.S.-China hawks very sad, I believe, since they regard China as a paper tiger that will fold in any direct confrontation with the United States. Their not-so-secret hope is that China will overreact to a U.S. provocation, experience a humiliating military defeat, the CCP loses its legitimacy, a political crisis leads to PRC regime collapse, America wins, Chi-Coms lose, the end. The Syria strike, I think, sent a message to the PRC that the Trump administration will pay more attention to geopolitical and political advantage and the China hawks and less to legal niceties in confronting China. In other words, less lawfare and more warfare. If attention to the legalities of American power are given shorter shrift, there's a lot of ways to make things unpleasant for China in the South China Sea. Let me name a few. U.S. declaring it will enforce a moratorium on any new Chinese island building. U.S. demands PRC dismantle defensive military facilities on its man-made islands. U.S. supports Philippine blockade and recovery of Scarborough Shoal. U.S. protects foreign oil exploration vessels in Vietnam's exclusive economic zones from Chinese harassment. U.S. blocks Chinese oil rig trying to enter South China Sea. U.S. supports Philippine recovery of Mischief Reef. I came up with these scenarios in less than a minute. I am sure the U.S. Naval War College can come up with a lot more, and already has. China is overextended and pretty vulnerable in the South China Sea. If Trump decides he doesn't care about respecting law of the sea, freedom of navigation, ASEAN agreements, the feeling and interests of allies, fears of military conflict, and whatnot, he can give China a lot to think about. So, I think Xi Jinping is going to order an update of Chinese strategy and tactics and plans for economic and strategic retaliation in case the U.S. tries to humiliate the PRC in the South China Sea. On the way home, Xi consoled himself for his rough handling at Mar-a-Lago by making a surprise stopover in Alaska on the way back to China to meet with the governor, Bill Walker. The meeting had been requested by China a month ago and was keyed to mutual interest in exporting Alaskan liquefied natural gas to China. It might also represent China's desire to establish itself as an Arctic player with important strategic and economic interests up there. It will also be interesting to see if Xi, in addition to Alaska, looks at the disposition of never-Trump forces in America's richest and most populous states like California and New York, and look for some more local-level allies and leverage within the United States for his dealings with Trump. Something like Trump sells arms to China's renegade province of Taiwan, Xi sells high-speed rail to America's renegade state of California. Good times. According to Governor Walker's spokesperson, Xi described Alaska as a mythical, almost mystical place for the Chinese, like a Shangri-La. And the Chinese know Shangri-La, of course, because they invaded it. Next up, China and India scrap over Tibet. On April 8th, His Holiness the Dalai Lama visited a town called Dawang in India up by the border with China. The Chinese summoned the Indian ambassador to object. The Indian government said the visit was apolitical and an internal matter, which are not the same thing. It's all politics, just so you know. Indian China hawks used the visits to Dawang to goad China, publicize the continued existence of the Sino-Indian border dispute, reawaken unhappy memories of India's humiliation in the 1962 war with China, and reinforce the narrative of the PRC threat to India's territorial integrity and security. Dawang is the site of an important Tibetan Buddhist monastery. It's the place where the Dalai Lama first entered India when he fled China in 1959. It is also, unambiguously, a key part of traditional Tibet, geographically and culturally and politically, that was administered by Lhasa but seized by India in 1951, just like the PRC seized the rest of Tibet, something that the PRC points out to anger India. The Chinese keep demanding that India return Dawang to the PRC, which simply is never going to happen. India, for its part, brings Tibetan religious leaders to Dawang to declare that it's part of India to anger China. And, for my part, I point out that the Indian assertion that China ceded Dawang to British India in 1914 is a myth and a fabrication. Sorry. The Tibetans don't have much say in this, I think. Reportedly, the Dalai Lama stated several years ago that Dawang was Tibetan, not Indian, but if he did, that has fallen by the wayside. Today, both Tibetan religious leaders from the Dalai Lama on down and the Tibetan government in exile, which is hosted by India, publicly endorse the Indian position. In recent years, Indian governments have brought the Dalai Lama and the Karmapa, another Tibetan Buddhist leader, to Dawang to conduct religious exercises and at the same time affirm that Dawang is Indian, to stick it into China's eye. These visits also offer the Indian government the opportunity to assert that Dawang's essential identity is multi-ethnic and Indian, and it is not just a Tibetan Buddhist enclave. On this visit, children lining the Dalai Lama's route were reportedly given Indian flags to wave. The exterior of the monastery was festooned with Buddhist, Tibetan, and Indian flags. As far as I can tell, though, Indian flags were not visible inside the monastery grounds where the Dalai Lama spoke. The Dalai Lama visiting Dawang was on one level another statement of India's willingness to play the Tibet card as a strategic gambit against China amid growing friction between India and China, and India's frustration that China is making some pretty significant economic and diplomatic inroads into South Asia, as I discussed in last week's video. The traditional calculus in PRC-Indian relations used to be that China didn't mess with Kashmir and India didn't mess with Tibet. That consensus is breaking down, partly because of strategic competition, but also because China is proceeding with the construction of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor through Gilgit-Baltistan, which forms part of disputed Kashmir. I suspect the PRC keeps Dawang alive today mainly as a talking point, along the lines of, well, India has a grievance over Gilgit-Baltistan, well, China's got a grievance over Dawang. The tit-for-tat angle is reinforced by the fact that China is working on a road and rail link through Gilgit-Baltistan, and India has just announced, well, it's going to build a railroad to Dawang. A major complicating factor in Sino-Indian sparring over Tibet is what happens after the current Dalai Lama passes on. The 14th Dalai Lama is a widely revered world celebrity who symbolizes resistance to the PRC's rule over Tibet. He is also getting old, and the PRC has cynically slow-walked any engagement with the Tibetan diaspora in the expectation that, after the Dalai Lama is gone, the prestige, cohesion, and political strength of the Tibetan community will inevitably decline. The Dalai Lama's health, I imagine, is something of a state secret. He's mentally and verbally acute in English and presumably in Tibetan, and he cranked out a 2-hour teaching for an audience of 50,000 at Dawang. However, physically, he's less than vigorous, which is perhaps understandable at the age of 82. Anyway, he won't be around forever, at least in this bodily form, and reporters asked him several questions about the succession. The prevalent assumption is that the Dalai Lama will identify a successor while he is still alive in order to preempt Chinese meddling. If this is the case, the successor will be a simpatico emanation, rather than a full-bore reincarnation. The betting is that the Dalai Lama will reach outside his own Gelugpa lineage to designate the current Karmapa, the young leader of the Karma Kagyu lineage, as his successor. Whoever the next Dalai Lama is, he, or she, will not exercise temporal authority over the Tibetan lay community. The Dalai Lama has already surrendered this role to the Tibetan government in exile. Within the Tibetan Buddhist establishment, there will perhaps be hidden or passive resistance to the authority of a new Dalai Lama from the notoriously independent and traditionally combative lineages and monasteries. So it looks like the next Dalai Lama will be more of a brand ambassador for Tibetan Buddhist culture. In Dawang, the Dalai Lama said it would be up to all Tibetan Buddhists, meaning not just ethnic Tibetans inside Tibet, but also members of the diaspora and also Mongolian Tibetan Buddhists, of whom there are a considerable number, to decide whether the social institution of the Dalai Lama was relevant and would survive. In fact, half of Mongolians identify their religion as Tibetan Buddhism. That's about 1.5 million people. There are only 150,000 Tibetans in India, Bhutan, and Nepal. The Dalai Lama is keen to develop Mongolia as a bastion of Tibetan Buddhism and has apparently pondered the advantages of cultivating the Mongolian church and perhaps even a Mongolian successor. That would not be the first choice of the ethnic Tibetan diaspora or the Indian government, I imagine. In any event, the prospects for the succession involve conflict, controversy, Chinese and/or Indian meddling, and diminished prestige and authority for whoever assumes the position of Dalai Lama. We may not see the likes of the 14th Dalai Lama again. Finally, the Chinese official news agency Xinhua released a beautiful 3-minute video touting the transformational character of the One Belt, One Road infrastructure project. It illustrates China's ambitions to use the OBOR as evidence that the future of Eurasia and Africa belong to China, not the United States. It was obviously long in preparation, but held for release to insert images of Donald Trump and Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago to check the China is a pure power box. The video is worth watching in full, but here I just want to show one sequence.
رغم الحرب بسوريا نعمل بصناعة الصابون ونصدره إلى الصين.
I take this as a pledge that China is prepared to assist in the post-conflict reconstruction of Syria, a trillion-dollar job that no other power has the interest or capacity to take on. The message? China is prepared to clear up the West's mess, even as Donald Trump threatens to make that mess even bigger. That's all for this week. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, go to newsbud.com, where you'll find exclusive content available only to the Newsbud community and the opportunity to interact with me on the China Watch show pages. See you there. I'm Peter Lee for Newsbud's China Watch.
For just a small subscription fee, you can become a member of the Newsbud community and help keep this website running. Your subscription will provide you with full community access to exclusive content, including videos and articles from Newsbud's team of experts and analysts, as well as a members-only monthly newsletter from Newsbud's founder, Sibel Edmonds. Sign up today for full access at newsbud.com.